Hello, good evening from London. My name is Jonathan Boyd, and I am the Executive Director of JPR, the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, and I'm really delighted to welcome all of you to this event today. Our role at JPR is to generate data to support planning across Jewish Europe and the wider world, and my own view is that today's topic is one of the most important issues, perhaps even the most important issue facing Jews today. In brief, there is an extraordinary compositional shift going on across the Jewish world. Our recent report demonstrated that there are now 2.1 million self-identifying Haredi or strictly Orthodox Jews across the world, and they comprise about 14% or 1 in 7 of the global Jewish population. Now, that's already a very significant increase from a generation ago, but the report projects that Haredim will comprise over 20% of the whole by 2040. And that's because the Haredi population is growing at a much faster rate than the rest of the Jewish population due to 3 key factors. First of all, very high fertility, about 6 to 7 children per woman. Secondly, normal mortality, i.e. life expectancy among Haredi Jews is really no different from non-Haredi Jews, may even be slightly higher. And also, thirdly, denominational retention. In brief, while some Haredi Jews, of course, choose to follow a less stringent path over the course of their lives, that's not happening at anywhere near the rate it would need to fundamentally alter the overarching demographic trend. So, barring some unforeseen cataclysmic change, the Jewish world is going to be increasingly dominated by strict orthodoxy in the decades to come. And that, of course, raises numerous questions that I believe Jewish leaders today from within both the Haredi and the non-Haredi worlds have to begin to explore and address with a degree of urgency that I simply do not see happening at present. Why do I say that? Well, just in reading over the notes I prepared for our panelists this evening, I included a number of questions that, whilst very easy to jot down in a memo, are actually pretty breathtaking in their possible repercussions. Questions like, are we on the verge of a major schism in Judaism? Are we looking at the failure of the entire Enlightenment model that maintained it was possible to live as a Jew in the modern world? Or conversely, after years of angst about intermarriage, assimilation, declining levels of literacy, and the unraveling of the ties that bind us together as a people, are we actually seeing the growing power of a type of Judaism for which these are largely non-issues? So our session today is about exploring some of these repercussions and some of these issues. And we have a really wonderful panel of experts with us. First of all, Dr. Daniel Staetsky, my colleague at JPR, and the director of our European Jewish Demography unit, who's also the author of our recent report on the Haredi numbers. Daniel is a demographer and a social statistician who's been with us at JPR for about a decade now, having previously served as an analyst and researcher at RAND and at the Central Bureau of Statistics in Israel. Alongside him are 2 experts from the Jewish People Policy Institute in Jerusalem, which is partnering with us here at JPR on this event today. JPR is a major think tank investigating a range of topics across Israel and the Jewish world, and very much helping to shape the strategic conversation both in Israel and in the diaspora. And first from JPPI, we have Dr. John Ruskay, who is really one of the most extraordinary and outstanding leaders of the American Jewish community, having variously served in recent decades as the Executive Vice President and CEO of UJA Federation of New York, which is certainly one of, if not probably the largest Jewish nonprofit in the world. He also served as Vice Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, the main body training conservative rabbis in the US. And before that, as Education Director of the internationally renowned Jewish Community Center, the 92nd Street Y. John has also played major roles within American society more generally, including being appointed by President Obama to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. He's also, as far as I know, the only person in the world to have received honorary doctorates from the rabbinical training seminaries of the Reformed, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and Orthodox movements, which is pretty remarkable. Also from JPPI is another of their senior fellows, Dr. Dov Maimon, whose expertise lies variously in religious anthropology, Israel-diaspora relations, and Jewish-Muslim relations, among numerous other topics. And he also serves on the advisory committee for improving ultra-Orthodox access to higher education. Dov was born in and grew up in France, but has lived in Israel for many, many years. And like me, is a graduate of the Mandel Institute in Israel, where we were both Jerusalem fellows. I want to give our speakers the optimal amount of time to share their thoughts on this issue, and we only have an hour. But you at home should feel free to get involved by sharing your comments below on the screen. You should be able to do that on YouTube, and we will certainly keep an eye on those during the course of the evening. Our time's short, so let's get going. And I actually want to start by asking Daniel a question about the numbers. Daniel, there's a sense of inevitability about what's going to happen over time in the report, in the sense that you're saying that 14% of all Jews around the world are Haredi today, and that proportion will be somewhere in the range of 21 to 23% by 2040. When you write that, how confident are you about that projection? I mean, given the changes that have occurred across the world as a whole over the past 20 years, how can you be so sure about what the Jewish world will look like in 20 years' time? Daniel, any sort of thoughts initially on that issue?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so let us try to address this question, how certain we are. They say, it's an expression, that demography is destiny. That's what they say. And effectively, this is what your question is touching on. Is it a destiny? And I must say that, first of all, I will give you an answer and then I will give you an explanation. The answer is demography is destiny, indeed, when the science of demography is practiced prudently. And I will explain what I mean. In demography, we have a methodological tool set, if you wish. Populations grow according to certain rules. What we need to know about whether population is going to grow or decline and at what pace is the number of births that happens in this population, the number of deaths that happens, and obviously the number of migrants that come into the population and leave it as well. In this particular case, we have a great degree of certainty about the number of births that happens and about the number of deaths. And that leaves us with a very significant surplus that's simply not projected to change very significantly, because even if demographic processes change, they change very gradually, very slowly. Now, what is then that degree of prudence that demographer needs really to make make sound projections? If you noticed, the projections that we produced, they do not go further than 20 years. We estimated that today Haredi population is about 2 million, and we projected that it will be about 4 million in 20 years' time. It's not unusual for statistical bureaus across the world, for the statistical unit of the United Nations, to produce projections which are 50 years, even for 100 years. These are very ambitious projections, and they assume that not only the demographic reality is known, but the social reality is known in some sense. That not only demographic, the actual figures will be known, but the nature of social processes will be effectively as it is now. We do not make these assumptions. And if I'm honest, I don't know what will happen in 20 years, but I do know that for those demographic processes that we work with, 20 years is a short period of time. Not much is expected to change in 20 years. So this particular modest projection horizon gives us a lot of confidence.
Great. That's so I think that's a really important piece just to clarify from the get-go. That certainly from a demographic point of view, we're pretty confident of what we're seeing here. Let me turn to you, John, and thank you so much for joining us. It's a real privilege for us to be able to share a platform with you. And really, it's a sort of a general question. What's your reaction to the numbers, to the projections? Do you see this as good news or bad news? What worries you about it? What gives you comfort? Like, what's your kind of initial reaction here?
Right. Well, first, thanks for including me. Delighted to be with you all. When reading this excellent report, it actually evoked memories of I think it was the 2011 New York Community Study, which showed similarly the substantial growth of the Haredi population in New York and the impact that had on the changing composition of the New York Jewish community, similar to what has been identified here. So when I read that or saw that for the first time, in candor, my reaction was relief. What do you mean relief? I am one of those people that the 1990 study was a wake-up, not a wake-up call, but was the shock for the American Jewish community into marriage, assimilation, etc. Would there be Jews? And you'll remember the number of conferences and symposium and articles that were on that very subject. I think, Jonathan, you and I were at a few together. And so on the one hand, the relief comes from, the truth be said, they're going to be Jews. And Baruch Hashem, the Haredi community will maintain the fact that the Torah and the living Torah will be with us at least for 20 years, as Daniel says, and I believe, given these trends, far beyond. My own focus, both who I am and the roles I've had, has therefore focused on not the Haredi community, although we've been very open to that, we'll talk about that later, but rather, can we reverse the trend lines in the non-Haredi community? And I'll just say a word on that, if I may. You mentioned the question of, is the Enlightenment model, is this revealing the fact that the Enlightenment model is challenged, if not, cannot work? I actually believe we are in the true test of the Haskalah, despite the fact that the Haskalah goes back many thousands of years, 200 years and more. Until the 1980s, 70s, 80s in America, even though we were increasingly assimilating, going to the best universities, getting jobs all over, we were actually a protected community because of the social norms in America among Protestants and immigrant groups of all kinds. We were kind of a mini kept community. Good news, bad news, and Jonathan Sarna has, of course, written on this at length. That's all changed. We now live in the open society. So the challenge, will Jews choose to self-identify not because they have to? They don't. Not because of guilt, they have little, because of the meaning and purpose they find in Jewish life. So during the last 20, 30 years, they've been focused on this, initiatives, etc. I think this is the work of the next century. In other words, now we're in the true open society. Will Jews self-identify? So to answer quickly, which is not so quick, let's assume Daniel's stats on the Haredi community continue certainly for 20, if not longer. The question from my perch, actually, among others, is two. Can we alter the trend lines in the non-Haredi community? And B, will we have two parallel communities, certainly outside of Israel, parallel communities, or can we find an agenda and ways for those communities to somehow, despite all the ideological differences, find ways of working together, given the shared history and destiny? Look forward to talking about that.
Great, thank you. No, appreciated. Let me ask the same question to you, Dov. And again, thank you too for joining us. It's a great pleasure for us to be able to do so. What are your reactions to this? Again, do you see this as good news, bad news? What's your sense?
I agree with every word by my colleague John has said before, and I would like to share with you something a bit different. I facilitate a forum of top-level Haredi rabbis at the Jewish Agency. It's with the President Yitzhak Herzog. So it's something really, top-level Haredi. It's mostly secret, but I'm just speaking about now. And I want to share you what they think about this denominational balance shift. This shift, they are aware of that. And the reason we have this forum is because we are aware of its change. And we understand that Haredi will have have more responsibility. And for sure, President Herzog is very aware of that. And this reason, he asked me to facilitate this forum. And I want to tell you what they say. So it's not my personal position, but it's what they say. The first thing they say, 2 million additional committed Jews is excellent news. It's excellent news. It strengthens the survival and the thriving capability of the Jewish people. We have 2 million Jews who are committed Jews, connected to Israel. And we know that the more people are connected to Judaism, they are more connected to Israel, and it's something very positive. The second thing they say, I don't share it. I just want to say what they say. They see that from their perspective, it demonstrates that liberal Judaism is a failure. I suppose we are not happy with what I say, but this is what the Haredi people say. They see the model, the reform model or the liberal model didn't deliver. It doesn't work. Our model deliver, your model doesn't deliver. So you can do whatever you want, but at the moment, even after the 1990 research and project, and it doesn't do. So this is the second point. And the third thing they say, listen, they say, the Haredi in America, and they are in contact, this rabbi are in ongoing contact with the Haredi in America. And we have delegation of Haredi leaders coming to Israel about the Kotel compromise, about the territorial compromise. And they say these people, this population is growing, and this population is against compromise about the Kotel, about supporting streams in Israel, and supporting the reform and supporting reform conversion in Israel. So they see it as a very good news, because we have less of this thing, but they see it as something which is let's say temporary. It's not something who can. So they believe that Orthodox Judaism is the only model that can work for survival, to have Jewish grandchildren. Or you come to Israel, and you can be atheist or whatever you want, or you are Orthodox. If you are not Orthodox, personally it can work, but statistically it doesn't work. And this is something what they say, but it's also a lot of challenge about it. I want to say that we have to be aware that the Haredi people, and you have in UK, for me, UK is the best community in the world. You succeed to do with Jeremy Corbyn what any community in the world have succeeded to do. I mean, you succeeded to bring together women, female reform rabbis, and Satmar Hasidim together, and to say Dayenu, and to stop Jeremy Corbyn to be prime minister. And you succeeded that. So we say it's and what I want to say about it, and it's not only that, it was not a Haredi initiative. It was an initiative from the Jewish organization. And the Haredi, they have generally, in long history, they have short sightings. I mean, they don't think strategically. And they joined the program against Jeremy Corbyn, but they were not the initiative. They are not the initiator of this program. So it's very important. And we have a ban. We have in Europe a law to ban circumcision in Belgium. It's not the Haredi people who do that. It's other Jewish agency and other organization. The Haredi will join, but they are not thinking. And so regarding the defense and regarding the resources, we have to be very aware that this growing population of Haredi, this change, is very challenging for us, and we have to be very aware. And regarding what has to do, I think it's like John has said before, we have to think how to incorporate and reflect Haredi inside the organization, and to reach out to these people. At JPPI, we have made such a research and a dialogue group, and John was leading that in America, regarding the possibility of joining the federation and the Haredi leadership, and to work together how to make it, and we'll speak later about it. But something has to be done. We cannot leave it. It's a very important news. It's not completely new to the Haredi world. They know it for a while, the trend. They didn't know the figures, but they know the trend. They see it every day. And it's important to, and I'm very happy that you put on the table today, and this is something that has to be discussed and think about it.
So thank you, Dov. That's like some fascinating insights there, and in a sense, it kind of takes us straight to the crux of the issue, which, or at least sort of, I think, one of the centers of the conversation, which is about whether what we're seeing is two very distinct parts of the Jewish population, and whether, given the demographic trends, can we realistically hold the Jewish people together as a single people? Because when you talk about those responses and attitudes towards liberal Judaism and some of the issues that are going on in the Kotel, that's clearly, red rag to a bull stuff to somebody who's from the liberal side of the community. But equally, you hear sort of quite often quite pejorative language about the Haredi community from the more progressive parts of the community. So can we hold the Jewish people together? You gave the example, Dov, of anti-Semitism and the British case of Jeremy Corbyn. Is it just that we can come together when we feel threatened as a collective, or is there a way to hold the Jewish people together given what's happening. John, maybe we'll start with you. Any kind of thoughts?
Well, on the one hand, this question of whether we can, quote, hold the Jewish people together and what that even means it could be a panel in and of itself. I remind everyone here, I think it was our teacher, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who wrote back in June of 1985, the publication, Will There Be One Jewish People by the Year 2000? And so, and he was then, if my recollection is correct, responding to the patrilineal issue and the growth of intermarriage, etc. Those were that led to that. So the question of what do we mean by being holding us together? And by the way, that's a question could be in parts of Israel as well, even though you share a state. I would say to you, from my New York experience, yes, both community relations and particularly community relations and in anti-Semitism, they were my successor, Eric Goldstein, my wonderful successor, convened a number of dialogues with both Haredi leadership and non-Haredi leadership because some attacks, as you both all know, were taking place in Brooklyn, many in the Haredi, near or in the Haredi community. How were we going to deal with this from a security perspective? So we came together then. I would say also in the area of social services. In New York, Lamashal, there is the Jewish Board, the Family Service Agencies, provide services in the Haredi community in consultation with the Rabbanim in ways which work for the Haredi community. So in social services, in dealing with anti-Semitism, community relations, possibly, there are a growing, still small number of parts of the Jewish community that recognize that government support for private education might be something that helps both the Jewish community and beyond, bringing those groups together. So there are areas, obviously, we're not going to have, at this point, for all the separatist reasons you know, Haredi and Reform teens going on Shabbat retreats at some camp. That's not going to happen. So what we mean by holding it together, are there agenda areas where we can find ways of working together? As my wonderful colleague, Dov Maimon just said, in England, you found that. We have some of them now. Can we grow them? And can we help do work with emerging leaders that will let them on both sides, in the Haredi community and beyond, identify and find ways of working together? I think that's a challenge opportunity because whatever the numbers are, in 20 years, when the Haredi community, let us say, is 20%, if not larger, okay? There's still going to be a liberal Jewish community. And it will be an important community for all sorts of reasons in a diaspora community like North America, for all the reasons you know. Mm-hmm. So this question of can we find and identify ways of working together on selective issues, I think remains an issue for us.
Okay, thank you. I in terms of the demographic projections, one of the things I often say is, even if, this won't happen, but even if we were to get to a situation where the entire Jewish world is Haredi and the liberal world has disappeared, the day after that, somebody in that Haredi world will say, surely there's a different way of doing this Jewish stuff. And that will develop, and that will develop its own momentum. So it's, this is not we're not heading in a singular direction. But Dov, Daniel, that question about one people, any sort of thoughts or reflections on, notwithstanding John's comments about what we mean by holding everybody together, any thoughts on that issue? Either of you?
Okay, Daniel, you want to speak first, or?
I can. It will be short.
Go for it.
I would like to bring out of the sociological jargon, if you wish, to remind us about the concept of assimilation. That word, assimilation, is used within the context of Jewish community, typically in a slightly or significantly negative sense, describing the experience of non-Orthodox Jews, non-strictly Orthodox Jews, basically gradual disappearance of Jewish culture, Jewish religion, Jewish characteristics, disappearance of Jews into non-Jews. That's how it's used. In sociology broader, Something entirely different is described by this term, and it's most frequently used to describe experiences of migrant societies, such as the United States of America, such as certain European societies today, where effectively what it describes is the change that happens to migrants into these societies, where migrants from all over the world adopt ways, customs, culture of the host societies, but also, and it's very important, the changes that happen to the host society, in the sense that not only migrants gradually come closer to the host society, but host society comes gradually towards migrants. There's some sort of convergence in customs. That is what happens. And that, I would say, is a law of life. When two communities or more communities live next to each other, gradually they come together because one starts resembling the other, and it's a mutual process. If you were to ask me about what I believe, what the future holds in terms of the relationship now between the Haredi and non-Haredi Jews, I think the best guess would be examining the world record on that issue, assimilation of two groups. Simply, the further growth of Haredi community is firmly on the cards. That means that with size comes cultural influence. I can see the ways of the Haredi penetrating into the non-Haredi society, and I have specific examples. I will not necessarily present them here of that happening. There's more that demographic process upgrades the strictly Orthodox community, if you wish, numerically. It makes them more visible. And it will inevitably happen that some of its ways, some of the ways of this community, some of its cultural characteristics will become appealing, will become more recognizable and popular. The same or a similar process will happen with respect to the strictly Orthodox. When it grows, it comes closer to the non-strictly Orthodox society, and we can imagine that the Haredi will adopt some of the ways and cultural characteristics of non-strictly Orthodox. So in my books, my best prediction will be a degree of convergence between the two communities, if sociology of the world, if the wider world has something to teach us.
Fascinating. So you're essentially suggesting that these two worlds that we're talking about, the kind of the Haredi and the non-Haredi, what we'll actually start seeing is a convergence of the two and sort of more of a coming together.
Yes, I do. Moreover, I think it is inevitable.
Okay, interesting. Dov.
Yes, so I will say that for sure something will happen, and we'll have interaction, and they will change. The Haredi will change, they become the majority, or they will become very strong part. But we have to take more responsibility. That's clear. It's happening already in Israel, and we may understand, and it will happen. But we can smooth the process. I mean, the process change. Demography is really the key of everything, but it can be violent. It could be also something which is not so smooth. It could be bad. I mean, with violence. We understand, for example, the economic aspect. You know Stanford Hill, you know that what we can say today, that the Haredi have an asymmetric relationship with the federation and with the organization, Jewish organization.
With what? I'm sorry, say it again.
Asymmetric relationship. I mean, they have a
What do you mean by that?
I will explain. Mm-hmm. They get benefit for security from the regular Jewish organization, as you know, from CST in England or SPCG in France or other things in America. They get services on welfare from a general organization. And when we have met with research with John a few years ago at JPPI, I asked the Haredi people, how do you manage, how are you in contact with the central Jewish organization? When we need them, we call them, and central organizations are very happy to help us. So it works, but it's not a symmetric relationship. I mean, they don't contribute. They get a lot, they don't contribute so much. I'm not criticizing that. I just say that people do that way today. And this is something that the more it will grow, the Haredi will grow, it will be not possible to continue this way, to work only on that kind of transactional relationship. They will have to contribute and to be part of a responsibility, and not only to take benefit of the things. So, and this is the reason they have to develop a cohort of leaders and train these people to be the future. I mean, if we don't do nothing, it will happen. For sure it will happen, but it will be violence. It will be suffering. If people in Stanford Hill or in some part of Brooklyn, we don't help them to have vocational training, if we don't help to know how to make business, how to go out of that, and they will go under and they will go on poverty. And we know what happened in the past, in the 20th century, with poverty in the Haredi world. A lot of people just left away. We call it the big drifting. It happened, a big drifting of the Haredi because I didn't have money. It was very bad situation. So we can avoid that. We can make it in a smooth way. We can make the change, and we have to do it. And we don't plan it, it will not happen. I agree with it will happen for sure at the end of the day. But we can avoid a lot of suffering and to bring more people, to bring more focus. And the Haredi leaders, they know that when we speak in New York or in everywhere to the Haredi, they say we need to do something, but they don't do it. The problem is because it's not emergency, it's something in 10 or 15 years, people, they don't think about it. They don't, the Haredi world is doing more what is emergency, what has to be done now, and thinking strategically come from the school of strategy and from business school or from army school. It's not come from the world of the Haredi world normally. And so when we, as you said, Jeremy Corbyn, IHRA, everything like that, we have to think, to start thinking now in 10 years, what will happen in 10 years from now, and to work scenarios and to say what could happen, how we are going to change that. And we have to start already now to have a kind of a task force of people working. And because it's not emergency, the point is because it's not emergency, people don't take care of that. And we really to make a real voluntary effort to set up such kind of task force and to think together. For example, John mentioned it, and he can tell you more about it. We can do few things together. For example, to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut together. We can make Hanukkah things together. We have to adapt. We have to adapt, not to mix women and men. We can adapt we can make some celebration. And I want to say, especially in small community. In small community, sure, it happened. It has no way in Baltimore or in Cleveland. But in New York, we have two double. We have a lot. We lose a lot of resources because we have a double system for everything. And it could be for sure a kind of centralization, but it will not happen unless people really need it, because unless people speak together and create trust and start building relationship. And we need to make it an effort to do that. If people don't do it, it will not happen. People will continue to live separately. And the point to God is we have to do together everything we can do together, to do separately what we cannot do together.
Dov, I want to pick up on, there's a lot in what you said, but I thought maybe we should pick up on the economic issue. Because one of the things we can see in our own data is that there are clear distinctions between the Haredi community and the non-Haredi community in terms of their economic circumstances. And obviously there are exceptions. I'm making generalizations, but on the whole, you see a lot more poverty and deprivation in the Haredi community. Is there an opportunity in the economics of the Jewish world that we should be grasping? Are there economic methods, approaches that we should be using that will help to bring the communities together, to bolster understanding? Is there something within those economic challenges that might help to foster closer relations between these different parts of the community? Any thoughts on that issue?
Listen, first, it's clear that the Jews are clever, are not trees. They are smart, they have good Yiddish Kopf. They think, and they will not like to be poor, and they will make themselves to find money. And the Haredi people, they will make money. Today, what we have in Haredi world, the economic is a bifurcated economy. We have we have a lot of poor people and some very wealthy people. But because they don't go to school, how you get money, how you have social mobility is through universities, and people don't do that. They get money, but it's only on small businesses, and it will be less easy in the future. It will be less easy in the future because more and more is technologically technological oriented, and we need to do that. We have to really to think about vocational and to help. So as you mentioned, I'm part of a Malag of a government Israel task force working to integrate Haredi inside universities and other programs. So we, in Israel, we try to make it with mitigated successes because anyway, you know, the Haredi mind is the following. They prefer that kids don't go to university, don't go to the army, don't go to work, because they go that they have what they call Yerida Ruchanit. It's a decrease in spirituality. And we have to find out to create models that they can get the job, they can get, like in Brooklyn College or other places, or Stern College, or even Yeshiva University in New York. And when we have to create program which is adapted for the Haredi people. If we don't do that, and you have Jews College or in London, other places like that, when Haredi work, and then in England we have really Haredi people learning studying in Cambridge, and we have I remember in Golden Green seeing people who have been really the best attorneys, and they have been, and this is the model we have to learn from Britain. I think Britain is a good model regarding Haredi. At least some of the Haredi who really go to university and get degree are involved and not decrease in their practice and in their commitment to Jewishness.
Okay, I don't know how much of that is happening, but John,
I would add just a couple of. Dov, of course, is pointing in directions which I strongly endorse. I would just add a few comments. One, I mentioned a few minutes ago the 2011 Jewish community study in New York. And it identified not only the growth of the Haredi community, but it also identified the poverty and the levels of poverty in the Jewish community among the Haredi in New York. And weeks after, a couple of very well-positioned Haredi folks said to me, "You captured well the growth of the Haredi community, and you captured well the poverty of the Jewish community. You know what you missed? You missed the wealth in the Haredi community." And the wealth in the Haredi community is, of course, an enormous source of what is maintaining in New York the extraordinary network of chesed and chinuch, of schools and social welfare institutions, many of them voluntary, but also all requiring some degree of resource that serves that community. So that's number one I want to mention. There's poverty, but there's enormous wealth. Two, we do have agencies. And as you know, to give you one, Met Council on Jewish Poverty was created in part and is a real partnership of the Federation and the Haredi community and Haredi leadership to deal with the issue of poverty in the Haredi, in all of New York, but it really is where it's located, primarily serves the Haredi community, and in Brooklyn and Queens and other areas. Third, as you know, philanthropy can only go so far in dealing with poverty at a high level, and therefore much of it is about government advocacy. The social safety net, the social welfare programs are fundamentally about government access. And the Haredi community, certainly in New York, through its political representation in the Assembly and the Senate in New York State and New York City, is able to access substantial support with the support of the federated leadership and the community relations people that deal with the entire community. Last comment, and Dov referred to this, the variations by community are substantial. I know Cleveland a little better. I don't want to say I know it, but I've spent more time there. In Cleveland, because of where people live, they bump into each other. They interact with each other. They're at the supermarket together. And therefore, and by the way, given the number of day schools, the Federation in Cleveland is able to provide a level of support for Haredi institutions, which I will simply say, regrettably, New York can simply not do. Add to that the geographic separation, and you are closer to parallel communities than in a place like Cleveland. So I want to just mention this. It's not one model. It varies enormously by many factors, including simply geography, where these communities are located, the extent to which they interact on formal and or informal bases, apropos of the question of holding the community together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, when I look at the community here in the UK, it's interesting because the Haredi community and the non-Haredi community are largely separated geographically. And my sense is, like, if you look at the, I mean, you mentioned earlier social services organizations, but when I look at the kind of the Haredi and the non-Haredi community here, you know, the social care organization you instantly think of in terms of the non-Haredi community in Britain is Jewish Care. In the Haredi community, they're not really accessing that. They've got their own organization. They've got Bikkur Cholim de Satmar, amongst others. They're also reading different newspapers. They're also attending different schools. So they're separated geographically. So I wonder whether there's what to learn from different communities where the geographical dynamics are either similar or different in some way. But Daniel, I want to move on, and I want to turn to you because I think there's you have some interesting observations about the Haredi community based on its age distributions. So like one of the things that's really very striking about the Haredi community is how young it is. I think the median age of the British Haredi population is 15, whereas in the non-Haredi community it's 44. So we're looking at very, very different age structures. Just talk us through a little bit what those age when you see that age structure as a demographer, what does it tell you, and what issues might it raise that we should be conscious of in thinking about the dynamics in the Jewish world?
Yes, thank you. I think two issues in particular. John, you may remember that several years ago, you and I published, of course you'll remember, published our first paper on the demographic of the Haredi community in the United Kingdom. And in that paper, we indicated something that appeared to us as very well grounded in demographic literature, but not so to our readers, that the youthful age structure of the Haredi community also means that socially, purely in social terms, it's a very vigorous society. It's well known that the Haredi community has a lot of children. But what is less known, or what is less intuitively understood, is that it also has a lot of teenagers. It has a lot of young people in general. And when this age structure is observed in the societies, well, non-Jewish society, that means one thing, and demographers in the past and at present indicated this. Vigorous society also, it's a risk factor. It's a risk factor because this is a society where a lot of people, they have youthful energy. And if this youthful energy is not directed correctly, it's a society that remains at permanent risk of some sort of discontent. It doesn't have to amount to violence, for example, but it's a society with a lot of potential for, let's say, vigorous political developments. Now, at the time, we indicated that this is again, it's a very well-grounded observation in demographic literature, but I remember our Haredi readership was not particularly happy with this conclusion, with this suggestion that we made. And they said at the time that the Haredi, they take an exception, basically. They have very good systems, educational systems, that take care of young people, particularly young men in these vigorous, very, very youthful age groups. And that in itself, that education, the existence of this educational system may prevent the excesses. Having reflected on it for several years now, I can say that we both were right. They were right, and we were right. And it's a matter of balance. And it's an unresolved issue for me, but I would call this youthful structure a risk factor. It's a risk factor that doesn't need to lead to any dramatic development, but it is very useful from policy perspective to be aware of that. We know now in the post-COVID era what risk factor means. Risk factor in application to a personal situation means that there is something that has an adverse potential. It doesn't have to develop into full scale, for example, illness. And for the Haredi society, this youthful structure is indeed a risk factor. And it is very possible that the educational system that exists and takes care of people in these age groups offsets the vigorous, let's say, potential of these people. Also, I must add that Haredi individuals marry young. And typically political unrest happens in the societies. It's not only the societies are young, but people are unemployed and don't have serious commitment in this particular age group. It so happens that Haredi individuals have very serious commitment and children in these age groups. So it's quite possible that in the net outcome, we're not going to see worse political excesses in this particular community. And again, from the policy perspective, it's something that the Haredi leadership should be aware of. The second point, and that's an interesting, and I hope I have time for that, is the not necessarily the youthfulness of the Haredi society, but the actual relationship between different age groups. One point, well-established point about the Haredi population, that it grows. And what it means, if we imagine what's called the population pyramid, is that it has this particular structure that gave the population pyramid its name, pyramid. It has a very wide base. And in that wide base, there are children. Okay, there's a very long shelf of children, a lot of children in that particular population. The shelf above it is a little smaller. These are slightly older children. The shelf above it is smaller, still smaller. And so that's in this way the pyramidal structure is created. This particular shape of a pyramid only happens in societies that have a lot of children, where those people who remain in the middle of the pyramid create a lot of children. So there are more children and more people in population. They not only they reproduce themselves, but they enlarge the population. What happens in populations like this, and it's a combination of this demographic reality, which I described, which is very well known, and so certain social customs, that populations like this are at risk of permanent or semi-permanent, I'll use the Haredi term for this, shidduch crisis. And that happens because, simply because typically women marry men which are slightly older than them. In the strictly Orthodox case, in the expanding population, women who are supposed to marry men who are slightly older than them are simply too numerous for these men. And that is something that is a permanent characteristic of Haredi, strictly Orthodox population pyramid. The younger generation is always slightly larger than the older generation. So there is a potential, great potential, for what's called marriage. It's not a really shidduch crisis, it's a marriage crisis, which, by the way, is not peculiar, is not specific to the Haredi population. It has been observed in the past in other populations as well. What's interesting in the Haredi case, that it is a permanent feature of the population pyramid. In other populations, this kind of crisis has been introduced by wars and irregular events. In the Haredi case, it's a built-in feature. And that is also something that Haredi leadership should be aware of. There are ways to relieve the situation. You can only relieve it when you're fully aware of it and of the permanent nature of it. And I think this will be my
thanks, Daniel. No, those are both like fascinating insights. Dov, I'm interested in your reaction to one or other of both of those, the constant shidduch crisis and the potential for or the risk factor of civil unrest, kind of very active politicization of a younger population. Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So first, I'm happy to listen to you, Daniel, because we see in Israel more and more young women who marry boys who are younger than them. I did not know why it happened, but I see it everywhere around me. So it was very funny. I have even 2 or 3 of my daughters who have married just the same age boys. So I think it's really something like happened more and more, and I see it dozens of cases around me. So it's really interesting because I understand now because of a pyramid of you say, okay. But I mean, people are going to adapt to that. It's not a challenge. It's not a survival crisis because people will adapt and no way they have to marry somebody and they will marry somebody who is going to be a bit younger. It could change. It will adapt to that. The Jewish people have a great capability to adapt. Regarding all the things that are very important to know about the changes we have inside the Haredi world. The Haredi world was a kind of elite group in the past. And today it's not anymore an elite group. It's something like a big, big stream. It's a lot. It was a matter of choice before to be Haredi and to be completely devoted to live a life of Torah. And today it's become a real way of life for millions of people, as you understand, and it's not adapted to normal people to be only studying Torah and not working and really to be involved in this kind of life. So it's going to, and we see already in Israel something like 40% of the young people who are not exactly there on the fringe of the Haredi world, are not exactly like the Litvak regular people who study Torah. We have already 40% who change. So it's something will ease because these people are more and more connected to the world. We have more than 60% of the Haredi who have some kind of internet, and we have other people who are involved in more social or cultural integration in some way. So something is going to smooth the process, and we are not going to have a kind of real crisis. But something has to be careful about it. And we spoke about the economic. It's not only the economic; it's also a social crisis that could happen, and we have to be aware of what is going to happen and to prepare that, to anticipate the things. And things are not really anticipated. We really see that there is not really thing will happen, but they will happen not on the best way. If we really can, but the problem we have, the biggest problem we have today is there is not trust. There is no, the Haredi world believe, the status quo we had in Israel, for example, was based between Ben Gurion and the Haredi world. And the Haredi world believe that the state of Israel is a temporary experiment. It will disappear. And the Ben Gurion people, they believe that the Haredi is just something which is going to disappear when they meet with modernity and with awareness and rationalism, and it didn't appear. The Haredi remain Haredi, and the secular people remain secular. So we have to think together another way, not to fight together, and to how to work together for the common good. And this has not been done. And normally the Haredi believe they don't need the liberal world, the progressive world. They believe that it's just something we can take interest or benefit from it, but we don't really need it. And it has to be changed, and it will take time, and we can make it smoother. We can work really, as John had mentioned, and I try to mention, really to make a real effort to think together, to approach, and we have really to adapt. It's simple. The Haredi are not so open to listen to other voices. It's clear because they are conservative and they are a conservative group and they are not so open. But it's also part of a Jewish institution. They are not fully open to the Haredi world. They try to reformat them. We see it in university in Israel, we see it in army in Israel, everywhere. And we can change that too, to accept a real liberal has to be someone who accepts the other as he is, and not like to change his mind, and not to try to make him the same way we are. To be tolerant to people who think as you is not really tolerant. So what we have learned from John Locke and what we have learned from Hume and so on, and John Stuart Mill, is to be heterogeneity could be a source of creativity, and we can make it. We can make it, and it could happen. I believe it will happen anyway, but we can make it if we make a voluntary effort to have, as we said before, a task force, and which is below the top level management of both groups, and to have committed people. To work with Haredi, we know that in Israel for many institutions, most of the Haredi don't want to be involved with the non-Haredi world because they are very afraid to have, as I said before, a decrease in their spirituality. But we have to choose few people. We are people to be ready to do that. They choose and they agree with the Haredi management, and to be the people who have been to be the connectors, to be the people who can make the connection with the general Jewish society. And this has been done, and it has not, I believe it has not been done as much as it could be. And we have to make effort to work it. If we don't make effort,
I'm going to come back to that issue, because I think we should. I'm just conscious of time, and we should start to round up. I'm just kind of looking through some of the comments that have come in. Thank you for those who have contributed. One of the issues that, and perhaps we should have been clear about this at the beginning, is a question of how exactly we're defining Haredi. And of course, in in the context of this report, it's really done through self-identification based on administrative records, sometimes census records, and that sort of thing. But there's an interesting comment from Ellie Spitzer, who says, "I'm slowly coming round to the view that the demographic rise of the community will in itself make a single term Haredi unsustainable due to increasing internal ideological and cultural differences." So, often the nature of this conversation has been very much kind of a binary one. There's the Haredi world and the non-Haredi world. But I think Ellie's there suggesting that it's much more complex than that. And I should actually, Ellie, it's great that you're on this. You're here. I want to give a shout out to a piece that Ellie wrote that was published in Mosaic in the beginning of January of this year, called "The Haredi Moment Has Arrived." I actually reread it today in preparation for this, but it's a really, really brilliant, fascinating article, and I thoroughly recommend it to those who are interested in kind of exploring this issue in a bit more detail. I should also say that JPPI has published the results of their own consultation on this issue, which is on the JPPI website, which is also a fascinating read. But we said we'd try to keep this to an hour, and I'm conscious that we're touching on issues that deserve not only sessions of their own, but probably kind of whole university courses. So we're dealing with a lot of complex issues here. But I want to ask each of you to, in conclusion, if you could recommend one thing that the Jewish leadership, either in the Haredi part of the world or in the non-Haredi community, or perhaps both across them, there's one thing that you think ought to be happening now, given what we can see demographically, what would that be? And in many respects, it kind of relates back to Dov, your comments about emergency. That we often, like, these demographic changes feel very gradual, so it's difficult to feel that sense of emergency. But as I said in my opening comments, I think this is big. I think this has enormous implications for the nature of Jewish life going forward. I think the Jewish lives that my children will lead when they're my age, I think the Jewish world will look different for them, and certainly my grandchildren. So what? Just to finish up, what would you recommend? What should community leaders be doing now? And I'm conscious that we're going to run slightly over, so please try to keep your comments short and clear and to the point. Who wants to start?
Well, I think we've actually, sort of mentioned this en passant. I mean, the good news is when I was growing up, and that's a lot of decades back, but there was a sense that the Haredi world, as I think Dov said, was going to be gone. Who was going to be there? As we now see, it's thriving, and there are some, which we heard, who believe the liberal world will be gone. And I would think who knows what happens 150 years from now, but I think for the next 20, 40 years, both communities are going to be here. I think the challenge is, can we identify 2 or 3 areas where both Haredi leadership and the broader community would say, we should work on this together? Strikes me community relations, maybe Israel advocacy, resources for social services might be a way to begin. The Jewish educational agenda is a more challenging one for all the ideological reasons, but in many communities it can work there as well. There are very few places where there's a commitment to work together to find solutions that might work. And I think a report like this provides an opportunity to maybe move forward on things like this now.
Thank you. Great. Daniel, you want to share some thoughts? I was actually thinking whether there are any specific research recommendations that you would focus on as in your capacity as a demographer, social statistician.
Yes, thank you. I think the recommendation that I would give to the Haredi communities, Haredi leadership, and it would be identical to the one I give to, in my generosity, to non-Haredi leadership and non-Haredi collectives, communities, and that is to collect data about themselves. And in saying that, I'm not giving them an impossible suggestion, an impossible task, and I would say that the state of Israel and other states, other countries around the world have a particular framework, have a particular method in which they collect data about themselves. Every country has something that is called statistical authority, and every country produces, and every statistical authority produces something that's called a statistical yearbook. If anyone, it's not a particularly charismatic book, but if you page through it, you would see the essentials of what's called national statistics. These things are produced every year. The data that feeds into the book is collected all the time. And nobody in particular so the officers for national statistics across the world don't need to defend their desire, their choice to publish that book every year. That is the compendium of national statistics. Something like this has to happen to every Jewish community on this planet, and that would facilitate planning forward. Now, the essentials, of course, it's impossible to create out of nowhere content of the entire statistical yearbook, but it is possible to create, to collect and publish and use some basic demographic fundamentals, such as the number of births in a community, such as the number of deaths in a community, some basic estimates of communal membership. All these things can be collected rather easily, and when put together in a particular place, they will serve various planning needs. I remember very vividly a conversation that I had with a particular Haredi leader from London who told me basically that every time they are asked for particular statistic, they need to launch data collection ad hoc, and it's very difficult to do, and whether it's possible to recommend what types of statistics should be collected. And at the time, I said that you can't anticipate all policy needs that you have. But if you commit to replicating the statistical yearbook of Britain or of Israel, for example, in essentials, not necessarily in every detail, you would anticipate and answer to many, many policy needs. I can guarantee that. So that would be my recommendation, to create a little statistical yearbook.
That's great. It's great. And it's remarkable how few communities do that in a systematic way. And we very much saw that actually in the course of trying to gather data on COVID globally, that it was very difficult to just access those sorts of data. Dov, let me finish with you. Again, we've run over time, so briefly, like one recommendation, what should be happening now?
The big recommendation is that the Haredi has to develop a cohort of leaders who can engage with secular world, secular society, and they have to train these people. And he has some program of do that to integrate in Ivy League in America some really top-level Haredi, brilliant students, and it has to be done with a kind of scholarship and mentorship to bring these people to the top level, and we need these people to be the leaders of tomorrow. And the side of America, the Jewish institution is really to incorporate Haredi. And regarding that, I will invite very much the people from Britain, for example, to learn from successes, like Cleveland and Detroit, when they have Haredi members of a board of organization, they managed to do, and so how to learn how they made it, how it was possible in Los Angeles too, where some Haredi inside the board, and it can be done. It's not easy, and they adapt, and they know how to make it. They have to make some compromises, and I invite the people to learn from successes and to start. And the last thing I can say because the Haredi world is more minded like the Israeli world, we have a decrease in the Israel diaspora attention because more Haredi, and Haredi thinks about very similarly to Israeli. So we have a decrease. So it's a good news. We will have less tension between Israel and diaspora.
Great. Thank you, Dov, for that. So we've got some great recommendations there. John pointing to kind of looking for 2 or 3 areas where we could come together, whether that's kind of community relations, Israel advocacy, social services, perhaps combating anti-Semitism is on that list too. Daniel's very much talking about the importance of collecting data and being able to see what's happening and monitor what's happening. And Dov, I think you're pointing to the importance of leadership training and maybe looking at models of best practice in terms of leadership training and integrating the different parts of the Jewish world into leadership models. So there are certainly kind of, I think, a few takeaways here that have come out of this. Obviously, it's a much bigger and deeper conversation, but I want to round up because we have run over slightly by 5 minutes, and just first of all to say thank you to all of the panelists, to Daniel, my colleague who I learn from pretty well every single day, and to John and Dov from JPPI. It's been a real pleasure hearing your ideas and being able to partner with you on this, and I hope we can do more of it. And lastly, to everybody at home who has been watching or commenting, Simon Goulden, you're absolutely right. This subject needs a lot more time, and it will be given more time, I'm sure. This is very much just an attempt to at least move the conversation forward and perhaps give it some direction. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined. This video will be on our YouTube channel, which is, if you just look up the Institute for Jewish Policy Research on YouTube, you'll find it. And it should be up there shortly if you want to share it with others or want to watch it again. But for now, thank you very much, everybody. And looking forward to our next event. All the best.